Good morning. If you're just joining us, I'm Errol Barnett at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York City as we follow breaking news this morning. Famed civil rights leader, the Reverend Jesse Jackson, has died at 84 years old. Jackson marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and ran for president twice. In a statement, his family said he died peacefully, surrounded by loved ones. CBS News senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe joins us now with more on this. Ed, good morning to you. We know Jesse Jackson ran unsuccessfully for president back in '84 and '88, but he was still able to parlay that into a consistent political voice. He gave consistent political pressure. How, Ed, was he able to do that?
Well, his ties to Dr. King and the civil rights movement of the 1960s really kept him in the mix, especially in the Chicago area, as a civic and civil rights leader, someone who used his what eventually became known as the Rainbow Push Coalition to mount some of the earliest corporate boycotts or economic boycotts on companies that his organization felt was unfairly maligning predominantly black customers and predominantly black employees. And so he used that economic clout that he had built in connections across the business community to launch his 1984 and 1988 bids. And while they faltered, it is obvious sort of the kind of trail it blazed, obviously. It opened the door for other African-American candidates to run for all sorts of higher office, most especially, of course, Barack Obama and Kamala Harris. But perhaps more notably, and something that isn't as obvious until you start studying up on it, is so much of what his campaigns were rooted in is now commonplace in the Democratic Party. You wouldn't have seen Bernie Sanders be so successful and able to mount such a widespread and popular campaign, at least among more liberal Democrats in recent years, had a lot of the themes that he talked about not been started or stirred up by Jackson in the 80s. The talk about class warfare, the concerns about the situation in the Middle East, concerns about corporate dominance over society. Those were quite foreign and different back in 1984 and 1988, but became so much more commonplace. And his '88 campaign, especially its initial and overt outreach to poor white rural Americans, especially farmers in Iowa and other deep southern states, and the appeal that he found for going to them and talking, exposed to Democrats that if you reach out across perhaps your ethnic barriers, if you try to build a coalition, it could successfully get someone elected. And it, again, blazed the trail for what Clinton was able to do in '92, what Obama was able to do earlier this century, what Biden tried to replicate, what others will try to replicate in 2028.
And Ed, we know that more recently the Reverend had suffered with Parkinson's and other issues that left him unable to speak as much as he wanted to be out and in the mix. There's a famous video of the Reverend during the election night of Barack Obama, which carries with it its own kind of political poetry when he was in tears and he spoke about thinking of what Dr. King, what Medgar Evers, another civil rights icon, would have thought at that moment. But he wasn't in lockstep with the Obamas and wasn't necessarily involved in how they developed their policies. Help us understand that right, and what type of reaction we're seeing today.
And it's because Barack Obama, as a young state senator, was rising in Illinois' political ranks at the same time that Jackson's own son, Jesse Jr., was trying to do so. And so ultimately, it was Obama who bested a Democratic field in that 2004 Senate race or 2006 Senate race that propelled him to then run for president in 2008. That's part of what made the relationship between Obama and Jackson so difficult. The other being that Jackson, for a long time, felt that he had not been given proper due by Obama and by others for the hits he took in the 80s and 90s for being the first or being the only or being one of the first to try and doing so unsuccessfully. Obama, he believed, never gave him proper deference in that respect. They had reconciled in recent years, but it was a frosty relationship. But to show you also how close-knit the Chicago South Side community was and black economic and legal and political power in Chicago, Jackson's oldest daughter was a bridesmaid in Barack and Michelle Obama's wedding because they were so close. The then Michelle Robinson had gone to school with Jackson's oldest daughter, and so they knew each other from the neighborhood. And it just shows you again how closely linked the Obama legacy is to some extent with the Jackson legacy, because if not for Jackson, obviously, it may have been more difficult for someone like Obama to rise. But it was a complicated relationship nonetheless.
Yeah, so interesting. But I guess that's family. You might all have the same spirit, but different takes on how to proceed. Ed O'Keefe with the latest on this from the White House. Ed, thank you.